happens now? What's it gonna be like? And
yeah.
after that, it went pretty well. You make 5 jumps, of course, so it went pretty well.
Yeah.
So.
Pete, let's talk about when you first went to Vietnam, and what year did you go there, and what were your duties?
I went there in 1968, early 1968, and I was assigned to the 101st. And you know, again, the Army took care of making sure soldiers were trained well for the job. At least they did back then. I think they probably still do.
Right.
But you know, we went into what they call a Screaming Eagle Replacement Detachment in Benoit, and we spent might have been a week, maybe 2 weeks there. I can't recall right now exactly what it was, but it was at least a week. And they would take us through the basic, you know, weapons training. They would take us through ambush training. You know, what to do in an ambush, what to do during this kind of attack. You know, so they trained us up pretty well, and you know, that's where they issued your weapon at that time, which was an M16 for me. And then we moved forward. And about that time, Ted had already hit, you know, so they had attacked Benoit, and there was a lot of actual fighting going on around Benoit. We as new guys didn't get to man the perimeter, but we certainly were worried and concerned about that. And then they moved us up to I Corps, which is where the 101st headquarters was, to Camp Eagle. And I was platoon leader up there, and my major job, of course, was building fire bases. And I had a platoon of men, and basically we broke down usually into squads or groups of different equipment. Like you may have a bulldozer and a backhoe and a couple of trucks, or if you were going out in the field into the Ashaw Valley, it was lighter stuff like you'd go into a fire base and it would be, and they would prep the fire base before you got there because it was really just a top of a hill.
Now tell our students, what exactly is a fire base?
Well, a fire base basically is where they support operations for infantry units throughout the location. And in northern part of the country, not on the coastal plain, but into the mountains, into the Ashaw, you were up a couple thousand feet in some cases, and they would put batteries, 105 howitzer batteries, on the top of these hills, so they could support infantry operations throughout the area. And they'd build them so you'd build one fire base here, and you'd put your artillery here, and then you build the next fire base, and the fire base would be within range of the first fire base you built, so you'd have artillery support, you know, if anything ever happened. And how they did that was basically they would fly in and on the top of the mountain, at least these fire bases that we built, and they'd blow off the top of that mountain with a bunch of what they call daisy cutters. And then we go in with a platoon, or you know, a little less than a platoon sometimes, of combat engineers along with an infantry platoon. And we'd take out chainsaws and stuff, and we'd cut the stumps off and blow the stumps. And that would take a couple of days, and then after that we would bring in these little light bulldozers called Case 450s. And then we'd flatten the area out enough so they could start to bring in the artillery pieces. And then about 3-4 days later, they'd bring in the artillery pieces in, and we'd spend about 2 weeks there getting that ready and getting stuff done. And you know, you're always vulnerable at those times to get hit by somebody, and a lot of times we did. We'd get hit by mortars or ground attacks or everything. That's what basically the infantry support was there for, but we of course had to be concerned about that too. And then we move on to the next fire base. So that's what we did, you know.
Pete, you were classified as a combat engineer or a construction engineer. Tell the students the difference between the two.
Well, a combat engineer essentially supports a division, and their job essentially is to do things like laying mines, mine sweeping, blowing up obstacles, building tactical bridges, building you know, base camps for the organizations to get in there. And you're assigned usually at a company level or a platoon level to a battalion or a brigade. You know, like a company usually will support a brigade. Like I supported the 1st Brigade in the 101st. And I would have platoons that would go out and support the companies in the operations. So it was mostly, you know, you were right there with the infantry guys on the ground. And my second tour in the Delta, I was a construction engineer company commander. And we did a lot of road construction, road repair, bridge building, bridge repair, cantonment construction, where we went in and built base camps. And so I guess there was a lot more construction than there was destruction, you know, as you do a lot in the combat engineers.
Tell our students a little about, and you've elaborated a little bit on this, but I want you to go in more detail about your daily routine in a combat zone. Exactly what you got up in the morning, and what'd you do? I mean, what was
Well,
your
if you're in an operation, and that's probably what you want to talk about,
Right.
is you know, you'd move out to the field and you'd go out basically and you'd do your sit reps in the morning and say, you know, how many folks you got, what kind of, if you had any attacks during the night, or you know, you report back on what kind of supplies you needed for the day, whether it was C rations or whether it was explosives or whether it was more fuel for the chainsaws, or you had a broken chainsaw. So
Right.
and then you went in and you started working with the troops and laying out what the fire bases were going to look like, and fields of fire, and where you wanted stuff done. You coordinated a lot with the commander on the ground as to what he wanted and what he saw was going to be the layout for that particular fire base. And you know, you went through that day working with folks, and at the end of the day, you sort of checked equipment, checked weapons. You know, you actually supplied folks for perimeter guard at the time, especially early on in the fire bases, because you know, it was just you and that infantry platoon and maybe a few other guys, so everybody had to pull their time on the perimeter. And it was sort of a daily routine, and then you go to another fire base and you do the same thing over again. And then about every 3 to 4 weeks you go back to base camp, and while you were back in base camp you'd sort of replenish and sit down. And they had a movie theater back then, not a theater but a screen on some plywood up there, painted white, that you'd see some movies on. So we did that on when we got back in the fire base.
So when you were out in the field,
camp.
you didn't no movies or anything like that?
No, no.
How often was mail call, Pete?
Pretty much daily.